The almighty M6 has been one of the very best cars in the Group 3 class since the release of GT Sport in 2017, but for a brief period of time, the M6 was arguably the second best. The Z4 was extremely competitive the first few months of GT7's release. I even qualified second in the first top split manufacturers race of GT7 with the Z4 behind only the former champ Igor Fraga. Shortly after that time, the M6 was rebalanced to be the dominant BMW again, but for the first time since then, the Z4 has been shown enough love that it is once again a contender. An underdog, but still a contender. Earlier this week, the balance of performance for Group 3 was changed, giving a much-needed buff to many of the cars in the class, and among those cars was the Z4. A couple months ago, I made a video about how the Z4 was randomly very competitive for a single race, but since then, and long before then, it has been nothing but a backmarker or a meme car. After only 10 minutes, I got to within a tenth of my anti-meta car's quality time, so I jumped in and had a few incredible races. This was my second race with the car since the update. With more than a few Ferraris and Citroens in the pack, my work was cut out for me. Simon, who is the overall winner of the manufacturer's season, was right ahead in the older Ford GT, and we had just had an incredible battle with me in the Z4 and him in the Peugeot VGT. I'll have to document that race at another time because it was incredible. While the mid-engine cars are generally better here for a variety of reasons, the understeering nature of the front-engine rear-wheel drive cars means that the front tires get coked more easily, so there are certain corners that need to be taken with extra care to help mitigate that. The main weakness of the Z4 is more understeer than average, so I had to keep that in mind throughout the entirety of the race. With the controversial custom slipstream on in this race, it was less of an issue following closely behind people, but the issue still remained, so I would need to do everything in my power to get ahead quickly and create distance before my front tires gave out. Turn 2 coming up was another weakness that the understeering cars had, as I would need to brake earlier just to make the corner and I'd be moving slower through the corner in general. The long sweeping right-hander right here, turn 3, is the main culprit for overheating your tires and was my main focus for deliberately slowing down and steering less in order to preserve better overall pace during the race. My good friend behind me, Flutie Flakes, also known as Wheaties, could have probably passed me with ease there, but it's always kind of scary on the first lap with mixed skill levels ahead, so he had mercy on me and made it so we could both chill a bit. As scary as the third sector can be with the mixed skill levels, Simon and Tinsley ahead also know it's a perfect opportunity to gain multiple positions if you're both lucky and clever, so as I saw them move on the inside to make some moves, I realized I may have a chance on the outside. Knowing how hard it is even in the upper echelon of skill to maintain pace bumper to bumper, it's even more difficult with mixed skill levels, so while everyone was jockeying for position on the tight line, I took the outside and just prayed for a bit of luck. After a close call, I used every millimeter of track given to me and sent it up the inside after multiple cars collided. The Z4 could now rotate easily, and with a little bit of throttle control, I could get it to turn on a dime, grip up, and exit like a rocket. I knew I could trust our new friend to the right in the Ferrari, so I stayed on the outside and that let me get my pedal down before anyone else in the pack. After entering the third sector in 13th place, I was now 5 positions ahead in 8th on just the first lap. Initially not wanting to betray our new friend, I had flashbacks to the years of knowing Flutie Flakes and realized I had to choose to give him the slip, especially realizing he had followed me all the way through the craziness. Sorry Shahir, it's just a seniority thing, I promise. Without realizing it at the time, delaying my donation of Slipstream to Wheaties may have caused them to be side by side entering the first corner, which worked out beautifully to my advantage. If I had known neither of them, I would have absolutely done that on purpose, but this time it was just a funny coincidence. The biggest takeaway, however, was the fact that the two metacars, even having Slipstream down most of the straight, could not quite pull on the new and improved Z4. With Wheaties still hot on my tail, I noticed the Ford GT in front and was hoping I could get to within the 1 second slipstream threshold just in time for the straight, but I was definitely worried that Wheaties would be able to get past me before then. While the Z4 was definitely better than it had been in quite some time, the approaching final sector belongs to the MR cars, and I was the FR meat and an MR sandwich going into it. After only half a sector, however, I had cut a full second off the Ford's lead ahead and realized there was probably a pace discrepancy. I decided then and there to be as aggressive as possible to get ahead of him and hopefully he would then slow down the pack. Placing myself on the inside, I baited the Ford into giving it a bit too much on this right-hander with the crest, which gave me the ability to scoot ahead of him at the perfect time. If I could nail the next 2 corners, I thought it would give me just what I needed to break the slipstream from behind and start going at my own pace to try to eat into the lead of the pack ahead. I didn't recall the Ford from any previous races, but after what I had just seen, I thought I had a chance to fully break the slip. While I did get a much better exit, the slip wasn't quite broken, but with Wheaties on his tail, I was pretty sure it would at the very least end up slowing both of them down if they ended up next to each other going into the next lap. I had been pulling on the Ford since the last corner, and it wasn't until about the start-finish line that the slipstream made up for my better momentum and he started slowly catching. With nearly a half second on him going into the braking zone, I could relax and just focus on my own race, but I was absolutely not out of the danger yet, because the 2 weakest corners were coming up consecutively, and at least the 3 cars behind were all going to be much faster through both. Noticing the distance between myself and the Ford hadn't changed after turn 1, I was certain I was going to end up having to defend my turn 5, but somehow I was able to put a few tenths between myself and the 3 quick guys behind just there on turn 2. While I was babying the car through this long turn 3, I noticed the cars behind were moving in quickly, but it became clear with a glance in the rear view that none of them were content being passive, and a few moves from them led to my lead increasing even more. Once again, our friend Wheaties was behind, but at 8 tenths, if the Ford continued jockeying for position, it could easily increase to over the magical 1 second mark, and I would then be home free. As I've said before, however, this last sector is ruled by the MR cars, so I was going to have to do everything I could to rotate this long-nosed beast and hope I could rely on the rear end traction to fly over the curbs and maintain my pace here. Watching the delta between Wheaties and myself, you can see it maintaining a bit of a balance through most of the sector. I was going to have to really focus on my exit on the final corner and do everything in my power to once again get on the power as early as possible and hope the amazing Z4 acceleration would be able to put that extra tenth of distance between myself and those behind. Entering as wide as I dared, dropping it into first for rotation, and exercising every bit of patience I had, as soon as I got past the apex, the number I was looking for popped up on my screen. While once again I was not at all out of the woods, the fact that I was no longer providing the slipstream for those behind meant that the superior Z4 power could carry me even further down the straight. With a respectable 39.7, it was indeed a fact. The Z4 was back. Since this race, I've actually learned a bit more about driving the car and can set low-mid 39s on the mediums and low-mid 38s on the soft. The front tires are still an issue, however. By the end of that lap, I had only managed to put about a tenth more distance between myself and Flutie Flakes, but what I hadn't realized is that he and possibly Simon behind both had penalties. Those penalties sealed the deal with the pack behind, so my remaining focus was on the 6 drivers ahead, the nearest of which was a full 3 seconds clear of me. Having nearly matched the fastest lap of the race, I had only cut 2 tenths out of the lead of the guys ahead, but I could see 3 of them were close. And just as I had started thinking about that, one of them went entirely off the track. I had also been on a purple lap for the 2nd lap in a row leading into the 3rd sector, and I was positive I was going to be able to get the fastest lap, but even though I was a bit annoyed at losing that chance, it seemed clear Cheeto would soon be behind me. I'm not certain if he had dirty tires, damage, or was just shaken up for the incident, but after missing the penultimate apex, I snuck in and immediately defended into the final corner. Even if the Ferrari had slipstream going down the front straight, I was confident the Z4 would be able to at least remain in a position to defend going into turn 1 of the next lap. While I don't know for sure, it appeared that Cheeto did indeed have damage, as he quickly disappeared as I flew down the straight. While he did have a bit of slipstream, there was no way he could make up the momentum and positional deficit, so I was in the clear. My next target was now only 2.5 seconds ahead. By the end of that lap, I had put another 6 tenths on Cheeto behind and had caught 7 tenths on the driver ahead. At this rate, it would only be another couple of laps before I caught the man ahead. To my surprise, I had cut another half second out of him by the final sector of that very lap. I was happy to be able to put myself in a position to attack down the straight with the slipstream, but he made just a little bit of a mistake coming out of the hairpin. I didn't quite want to take the chance to get ahead before the final corner and give him the chance to use my slipstream instead, so I decided to just pressure him as hard as I could leading to the final corner. After he made a mistake just like the last Ferrari on the last lap, I decided I should try to get him on the final corner and rely on the Z4 power once again. Sneaking up the inside like this gives him the opportunity to go wide, carry more speed, and get on the throttle faster, so I needed to make sure I rotated the Z4 quickly and got on the power hard. As soon as I realized I was clear of his bumper, I tracked out to maximize the exit speed, and then the drag race to the next corner was on. He had done a much better job of positioning himself than the last opponent, so I immediately went on the defensive. As he approached my bumper right about the start-finish line, I knew I would be able to defend going into T1 on the inside, but to my surprise, he gave me a bump draft. Now, it's not at all outside of the rules or even a surprise if he would want to give me a false sense of security and then send it on the inside, but I had had some great races with him recently and thought I could at the very least trust him not to track out if he did do that. To my relief, he just followed me through the corner and my sights were then on the next driver once again. This time, the next guy ahead was nearly 4 seconds ahead, and not knowing his strategy, I knew I was at a strategic disadvantage with this car as I couldn't risk an undercut. If he pitted early, it would put him even further ahead, and my ultimate position would most likely be the one I was in now. By the end of the next lap, I had somehow cut the distance down to less than a second and a half. I was initially planning on pitting lap 10 so I could have the best possible pace for all 5 laps in my soft stint, but seeing that I was able to catch him this quickly, I decided to bet on my pace instead. If I had waited another lap, it would have been my slowest lap on the slower tires, and his out lap would have been faster than any lap he had done, assuming he didn't have any issues. By pitting at the same time, it put us on even ground with tires, and after the amount of time I cut out of him in the last lap, I was certain I could cut another half second in one lap. On top of that, the longer it took me to catch him, even if my tires were a lap newer had I decided to wait one more, the slower I was going to go. It was obvious the front tire wear in my Z4 was going to be bad on soft tires, so I knew my time was limited to attack. After realizing I dodged a bullet by coming out ahead of Andy, who had possibly done a bigger undercut, I noticed the wonderful and beautiful Paul was right ahead of the loosest unit. I wasn't quite sure what the unit's pace was like, but I knew Paul was going to be formidable. If they worked together, it would probably end up being a battle until the very end for at least all 3 of us, if not also Andy and Pilota Reserva right behind. On the outlap, the 2 ahead had pulled away from me slightly, but leading into lap 11, I had cut that distance down and was poised to attack going onto the straight of lap 12. Not only that, but we had all caught up to Davila in second place. When I saw the unit go all the way off there, I thought that I might have squeezed just a little bit too far, but I was also certain he was going to get a penalty, and then the weirdest thing happened. If you've been doing this race very much this week, you may have noticed that randomly, when a car goes entirely off at that corner, they aren't assigned a penalty. For whatever reason, however, I was off by a millimeter or 2 and ended up with a penalty when he didn't even get a slap on the wrist. I fully blame Paul, the lawyer, for getting the unit off quickly with PD's law department, and I will be suing you, Paul. Unfortunately, I'll also be hiring you to sue yourself, Paul, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to play out. Since the penalty system works by forcing the car to engage the brakes for a predetermined set of time, I knew I had to just get as much momentum going into the penalty zone as possible to mitigate the effects. Going wide in the final corner and using the slipstream of the loosest unit was all I could do to minimize the damage. I realized after the fact that I should have moved to the side instead of bumping the guy ahead, as the bump draft takes a bit of time to be beneficial, but we're talking about hundredths of a second, so it didn't end up mattering that much. In the end, however, it did put the loosest unit in a position to pass Paul, where it would have been more difficult to do so without my assistance. Not only did I accidentally give the benefit to my friend's opponent, not giving him the bump draft may have also made his overlap much smaller, which would have slowed them both down for me to then attack. This is all stuff I'll have to store in my memory banks for future situations, but it's kind of fun to think about the far-reaching consequences of split-second decision-making. While I definitely want to always try to pass my friends, I don't want to necessarily help anyone else pass my friends. It's an interesting thought process to have while racing. It wasn't until turn 1 of the next lap that I started getting close to Paul and the unit. That sounds like a great band name for Paul, by the way. Paul and the unit had still been battling, but they were both quick pace-wise as well as smart when it comes to battling. They weren't losing much time, so it was still difficult for me to join the battle. Knowing turn 2 and 3 would be my weak points, I kept it easy on the tires and decided to just stay close enough to either pounce on a mistake or use the slipstream going into lap 14. While I could still do a better job of babying the tires on turn 3, I was being mindful not to push in that corner, and despite that, my fronts were already suffering. I was afraid at this point that I was going to run out of tire before I was able to make a move on either of the guys ahead. I was also aware of getting another penalty coming out of turn 4, so I wasn't pushing there nearly as much as I could. But luckily, I was still very much in the slipstream range, and the run down to the hairpin was long enough for that to help me just a little bit. With nearly 40% wear on my front left tire, I was not confident I was going to be able to keep up with the Ferraris in the third sector. With a tiny bit of contact, which looked just like a bit of a racing incident, it was enough to slow Paul down just the amount needed for me to get all the way up beside him. I took the chance to stay close as we entered the crested corner, and I risked it going heavily in the throttle coming out over the curves to try to get fully clear. With no overlap, I was able to take the line I wanted and attack full bore, trying to stay within the 1 second of the loosest unit. I was hoping I could get a good enough run going onto the straight that the Z4 power could once again carry me. Even if Paul had my slipstream, having the slipstream of the unit ahead would certainly move me quicker, and hopefully quick enough to attack the loosest unit going into turn 1. Looking at the deltas between the unit, myself, and Paul, it became clear that the Z4 power did make the difference in this situation. Once again, the front engine meat in a mid-engine sandwich, the newly balanced Z4 was once again showing how special of a car it is. While the tire wear and understeer are extremely noticeable against the mid-engine cars, the power it's been given to balance it out tipped the scales in my favor in this particular situation. With no defense from the unit, I found myself in a solid podium position, but as is the theme on this track, I was now ahead in my weakest part of the track, followed by 2 capable machines with the advantage. If the unit could get ahead before the final sector, I certainly would not be able to get ahead before the straight, and while that would mean I could pass again going into the final lap, he could also repeat the pattern and pass before the finish line. As predicted, they were both catching me very quickly as we navigated turn 3. As I braked into turn 4, the unit got very close to being able to put on a move, but as we exited, it seemed that I was somehow able to move the Z4 quick enough to neutralize the threat. With my focus on the guys behind no longer a priority, I now had about a lap to see if I could cut down a 2-second gap to the next driver. Entering the final sector of the final lap, I had only cut about 6/10 off his lead, but on the tricky hairpin, he made just a bit of a mistake. Losing an entire half of a second in that one corner, I was now fully within slipstream, and with only a couple corners left before the straight, I was not going to relent. Despite the fact that my tires were nearly completely gone, I was still catching him bit by bit every single corner. I was nowhere near close enough to try to sneak on the inside and force him to take a weird line, so I had to just follow him wide and try to get a good enough exit that the Z4 power could push me past him before the start finish line. Having cut a full second out of his lead in the final sector alone, he was still 6/10 ahead, and unfortunately, it was going to be too much for me to overcome. With all that said, starting in 13th place and finishing on the podium in one of the beautiful forgotten Group 3 cars, possibly my favorite of the forgotten cars, I can't complain. While it is still an underdog, the Z4 is now actually viable, and I'm excited to see what it can do in future Group 3 races. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've been enjoying my new Forgotten Car series. As always, please drop a like and follow if you like this content, and I'll be leaving you with a look at my current members who I love and appreciate very much.